All right, with was it 2 weeks to go? This is October 24th, prepping for IETF 118, our SCITT Architectures meeting, Architecture Authors meeting to be complete. Okay, so I did send out a quick note. Let's see, chat. Here we go. For the agenda, well, proposed agenda, just as we're getting down to the wire. So first of all, we have a draft out. So hooray! Thank you for everybody that's been contributing through PRs, issues, commentary, feedback, everything. Got a nice note from Dick this morning that covered some of his concerns or questions around consumers. I believe was specifically what he called out, but that was good to get an external read or a read from it. Let me guess, I'll share my screen. Hold on.
Yeah, regarding the agenda, I would like to get back to discussing the CWT change, which, at least from my viewpoint, went really fast without and with lots of questions and changes that will need to be propagated to the draft. So, so I'm not sure if it's on the agenda, but that's something I would like to add to the agenda.
Sorry, so yes, we were fast and more of the deadline was coming and that the deadline didn't move. So I was trying to be as proactive as I could to let people know we were, it needed a lot of cleanup. The more I read it, the more it suffered from changes along the way, from the last couple of meetings, because there were some sections that were completely duplicated and independently edited. So I tried to be careful not to fundamentally change anything about the technical accuracy of the doc. And in fact, when I found those two places that were actually out of sync with each other, I went back to PRs and I tried to get I looked for the most recent commentary around musts and shoulds. That was the biggest piece. So I'm hopeful that I did it did the best to give credit to the readers that are spending their time reading it, to put it in its best shape. If I missed some specifics, then we should definitely work to address those.
So I had a look. The changes look good to me. The most controversial one is to go ahead with a CWT, which we didn't discuss that much, and which I anticipate will trigger a lot more discussion and changes. So that's to me that's by far the biggest change we made.
That's fair. So I see hands raised. Let's just quickly do an agenda bash just to try to play time cop, because just like Santa doesn't avoid his dates. 118 is coming, and our meeting is on Monday. So while we have a little bit of time on the weekend during the hackathon, it kind of takes away from the hackathon if we're still prepping the slides and everything. So I'd really like to get as much as we can done this week and next. It is this week and next, right? Yeah, we have this week and next to get the presentation done, and then we're refining it on the weekend. So I want to play time cop on that stuff. So do you guys see my screen sharing?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have the red border, so it's a little confusing. So hooray, shift. Yes, Cedric, point taken on the CWT. Not everybody was part of all those conversations. Well, we put them out there for discussion and PRs, and we discussed it last Friday, where we're closing down.
But it wasn't a SCITT meeting, right?
And there was a recording on it. So I did, but we were putting PRs and issues, and I was sending emails out for folks. And I look, we can always turn, there's nothing final about this. It is a point in time. If we don't like something, as we learn, we could always adjust.
Well.
So anyway, just kind of getting back to the agenda. So I was thinking, I was triaging everything out of 118 yesterday. And then I realized, well, wait, the draft is cut, but we could use the issues to triage what we want to focus on at 118. So I was thinking we would go back through those and figure out what we want to pull in to actually discuss at the meeting. And then we need to come up with what we want to do for the actual presentation. So that's kind of what I dumped some thoughts here. It's by no means complete. It's just a starting point. I like putting a stake in the ground so that we have a reference point. So with that, I'll shut up and yeah, people can add themselves or I'll start typing. I believe Hank, you got your hand up first.
Yeah, so the CWT discussion is a very specific one. So CWT claims and headers solve some problems as same as the feed or reg info would do. So I hear that Roy actually got a little bit off track. I think I'm not putting words in his mouth. He might contradict that. But I felt that he was talking about I need to tell people, the consumers of statements in the end, at which registration policies things have happened. And he showed less interest in the feed. So some people are building applications on this, prototype-ish or even more beyond. So I know of Archivist. I know that Orient Transmute build something. I know that Microsoft is building something. And I want to hear, I think all of these parties that I know doing implementations are at the hackathon. I want to hear what items do I need to put when I create a signed statement into the non-opaque part that is the envelope, and why. And I want to have the intent defined, not necessarily talking about feeds or claim names or whatever, but the intent. So I need this metadata to accomplish foo. I need this metadata to enable foo. I need this wild bag of things I will never know what are in there because of foo. So I want to have this requirements on why creators of signed statements want to put something in there and why we should support that. And on the other hand, I would have, if you have the time, to address Roy's immediate need a little bit. I want to have the same discussion for the receipt again. So this is like you want to say a time check? No, it's like a safety net check. Yeah. So where are we? What do we think? Are we still on the same page with what should go in the non-opaque part of signed statements?
Mm-hmm.
And what is definitely today our opinion is the application layer part that can has to look into the opaque statement part because it's SBOMs, CVEs, VEXs, whatever. And so we have to really make this demarcation line so get not confused. So Dick was less confused now. I think Ray is pretty much on track here. But that is one item. One for the signed statements, one for the receipt on the in the same manner. And as a side note, I'm stopping now. And as a side note, the old receipt ID will die in a few days, which is okay because we moved the receipt for SCITT back into the architecture document, and it is based on the committer ID in COSI. So that's okay to have that one die. And yeah, and that's basically my part. Thanks.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
sorry, let me make sure I got, hold on, just I want to keep up with the notes. Hold on a second. So SCITT specs. Is it this receipt we're talking about? Last updated, where does it say it expires? Am I pointing at the right one, Hank?
Go scroll down a bit.
It showing expires on 20th of October, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, expired here. Thank you. Okay. So this is the one we're referring to. All right. So who was next? That was Yogesh. You're next.
Me, yeah. So I think I was about to say a few things which are quite similar to what Hank said. In the hackathon, we should come up with the requirement, what this kind of feed or the registration info is used by the implementers of SCITT like RKVST, Microsoft, or Transmute. That's one thing. That's one thing I wanted to highlight. And then second thing I would like to seriously discuss in IETF 118 is we have kind of a confusing statement of the word use registration, because we say reg info or registration info going from the issuer in the payload or the header to the transparency service, and in the other part we talk of registration policy, and that registration policy has some linkage to the registration info, and I'm not clear what, why, and there's a big gap in the specification. So this is kind of related to what Hank suggested. but maybe it might come at the stage 2 while we address the stage 1, capturing the requirements about the reg info field in the header first, and then discuss the subsequently connected topic, which I am talking at point 2, which is connection between in the header, the registration info versus the registration policy of the transparency service. Yeah.
Agreed. And Cedric, you're next. When I was
yes.
going, hold on just one second.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to affirm capturing notes. When I was going through all the editing to the point of not trying to change the document, but trying to make it coherent, I did notice what you're getting at, Yogesh, is the registration, reg policy, and receipts. There is a bunch of looseness that started happening there. And yeah. That's why I captured this item, thinking that's kind of the next piece, is finish the submitting of statements to SCITT part, because I think that there's conceptually pieces there that was originated, but as we've been editing, it's gotten a little broken. So I'd like to, that was me capturing that exact point.
Yeah, okay. Awesome.
Cedric?
I think Cedric is next, yeah.
Yes, so I agree on what the capture is very important. I think equally importantly for security, we need to also clarify where to put it, because now the format is much more lax than it used to be. We have extensible CWT, we have extensible reg info, and we have also possibility of leaving fields on the outside. And so there is some fields or some information that would occur in multiple places. And I think that's something we tried really hard to prevent in the past, and we need maybe by specifying your profile, maybe by mandating where the information should go, but we need to tighten that a bit, because right now there are kind of information that are possibly useful, and that could be put at 2 or 3 different places, and that's bad for interoperability, and also that makes me nervous as part of sign data. If we take as an example the not valid before, don't use after, now it can be in CWT. Right now it's in reg info, and I guess it could also be recorded as part of causes. So it's not very complicated, but each time there is no ambiguity and you could put the same information at different places, we need to tighten it down.
So we'll go through the list. I do want to do a time check. I want to make sure we're actually working through issues and stuff. So let's do another at 20 minutes after, or 22. I'll give it 5 minutes. 22 minutes after, we'll pause this part. I can't lock a queue on this. So Hank, you're next. Hank and Ray. And if we could hold it at after Ray to going through our agenda bashing, that'd be great.
Yeah, only quick question to Cedric. In line 46, I try to capture what you're saying. So what are the consequences of introducing more lax content rules for the COSI header? Do we need to have a more prescriptive profile template now for the software supply chain use cases? That's basically what you're saying, right? Because we are adding flexibility at the root. Yeah. Do we be more prescriptive now in the use case? Is that what you're saying?
That's part of it, but not only. As an example, now we do not mandate any more than the issuer be the ID identifier. It can be anything, and I'm wondering if it's
no.
Well,
I think the ID is still a must. Anybody on this call?
Yes, but it's gone because the issuer in CWT is just a URL. It can be anything really.
Where the profile would be kicking in. So that is an example. DAD.
Okay, so maybe by the profile we can address those, but until we do, I will be a bit nervous. Yes.
Okay.
So I did. Sorry, I'm giving a little emoticon to Ori here. I did capture. I don't know why I'm typing did. GitHub IETF draft. And Ori brought up a little about somewhere he mentioned something about did. Where was it? Oh, here. So this did get a little, when I read through the doc, it was hard to see exactly if did equal ish on CWT claims. So I just put a very loose capture on that there to.
When CWT, it's laxer. It's either a string or a URL. It can be anything really.
So by all means, please, add any more clarity to that issue if you want.
Okay.
I just pasted it in the chat. Ray.
Okay, yeah, I think this follows along with the current discussion. And we do this a lot in this group as well as every other group I've been in. And my whole life, I think I spend way too much time on trying to compare what the field names mean and what's inside the field of these things. And it's a common problem in database, conversions and stuff. That's going to be probably, the higher level thing is going to amount to what are the field names going to, if you can, stick to these. And for different use cases, they're going to need to really get into how to make the content of the fields be something that is not going to go crazy and have to be converted every time. So for real supply chain type of thing, that is unfortunately a thing that we're going to have to address at a higher level. But I'm not going to add more here other than we just need the place to put those things and then then we'll define them at a higher level and not spend too much time. But what we're already doing is saying, okay, is it subject or is it feed, or whatever the other name is? And that's a typical case. How much time have we spent on that? So unfortunately, it's like this with, especially when you get up to talking about real things, how the people name them, and are the names going to be the same or different? And then are those names, even though they sound very different, they're the same thing, etc. Certainly not something we want to do here, but let's just make a box for it and as much as possible try to avoid the issue for this lower level area. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. That was really the crux of pushing that draft out, is to make sure we have captured all the loose conversations and solidified them in one document. If you look, we're literally at the point we have no PRs left. Sorry, no PRs, current PRs open.
And thank you, Steve, so much for doing that. Putting that work in to get that done. It really needed to be done by a single person doing it, because you can't do that as a group. Yeah.
I appreciate it. I do appreciate everybody's patience along the way. And I did trim this down to the things that I thought we culled out a lot of the stale ones. And if they get revived, they get revived. That's great. So we have a document as a reference point to work from back to 118. So from a presentation agenda, I think obviously a summary of what we changed since 117 seems like a good point. I don't know if anybody objects. So I'm going to move forward. If somebody objects, please interject. Within that, we obviously did some terminology updates, and feed became subject. And I do struggle a little bit. I'll be clear. When I wrote the document, it was interesting trying to find subject as a property name, which basically had the construct of a feed as a collection of statements about an artifact. So feed is a word that does explain. It's hard to say a subject is a collection of things, as opposed to the subject is the property you set to be that collection to correlate a bunch of things together. That said, that was where we left it, so we can see how we want to. I mean, we still have the concept of artifact, even though we talk about subject points to artifacts. So I think there's potentially some tweaking still left, but that at least reiterates where we're at right now. And in fact, in the document, similar to what we did in other places, I put, because we talk about registry, and then we say go look at append only log. So I did the same thing for people looking for feed and to look for subject. Go ahead, Ray. Oh, sorry, Roy.
I went and got my COVID and shingle shot on Sunday, so I'm still struggling through that.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Is that what you're laying down and we're just looking at a wall?
Yeah, why you're looking at that versus looking at OV. And I had to go into the office yesterday, so that made me have to set up my computer again. In some ways, people are talking about feeds as if they were cursors to a database. I still struggle with the value of it coming off the ledger. You can tell from Dick's comments yesterday that he's still wrapped around an Axle thinking of it as a query database. And so we still need to have that conversation of who's supposed to use it and what for. To me, the feed, when you're talking about it in 118, is it meant to be for auditing purposes and for verification? Like, how do you hook up to it? Or is it a cursor that I can come back to and say, hey, show me what's happened since the last time I was here, which then puts a lot of state questions on the database. It's still, like I said, there's two other diversions here from where we were. One was the original concept of the feed, which was on extended key usage differentiator, which allowed you to diverge the streams into two, which was Sylvan's comments were, and the second one is my registration problem of how do I know when somebody goes off and changes trust relationships.
Agreed. So this, you missed it when Hank was bringing up specifically your point, and I think it's in the notes here somewhere. That's why we wanted to get stability on feed subject CWT so that we can have the next level of conversations. So for instance, it's the finishing submitting of statements to SCITT. That's the registration policy. And we discussed that just in the beginning here, and issuing receipts so that we can start getting to the auditing capabilities, getting information out of SCITT. I'm highlighting my screen. I don't know if you see it.
Yeah. You want to fix this.
To capture your exact points.
Can you fix statements in the last bullet point? Finish submitting.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. Wait. Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other than
Can't
that,
see the screen for share. Who's next? Sorry.
Other than that, the only thing remaining that I have questions on is for a DID document, how do we retrieve the state? Is it a new set of verbs? And conceptually, in my mind, I was thinking DID documents, we retrieve the whole thing every single time. But according to Ori and Cedric, that's not how it's going to work, which then gets into this question of what do we put in the ledger for a DID verification? Is it the full document or just the fragment or whatever? And we've never gone there.
Ori, Hank, you want to chime in on that?
Well, I think the first comment I would make is I'm increasingly annoyed with DIDs, and for what we're doing, we might be better off just removing them entirely from the spec. There's protocols that allow for discovery of issuer metadata, which is how you discover keys. And they're, in general, much better defined than anything regarding DIDs. So, like, for example, the issuer metadata discovery for SDJWT for verifiable credentials, it's like much more concretely defined and usable than DID key discovery. So I guess I wrote parts of DIDs, I wanted DIDs to do well. They're not seeming to do well, not getting a lot of contribution and adoption. They're confusing, and part of why they're not getting adopted could be that they're just poorly designed. I take responsibility for making many things that people shouldn't use. It's fine. We can get rid of them. I think it could be massively simpler to just say transparency services have to support discovery of key material. Issuers have to support discovery of key material. They both follow the metadata discovery protocol as described in SDJWT and OAuth OpenID Connect for VCI, period, end of sentence. We don't need anything else.
So is your proposal that basically the CWT issuer instead of the three-letter one, is that generic enough to capture if somebody wants to use DIDs or somebody wants to use something else?
Well, it is, but my point is generally that if you've decided to use DIDs, you've created a problem. And if you're struggling, like with the amount of struggle that we're having on identifiers, I would just remove them from the spec. I would just say, hey, like, you know, you're going to discover the issuer's keys like this. You're going to discover the transparency services keys like this. Read these specs from IETF working groups with lots of expert engagement and review that define these metadata discovery protocols well. DIDs are not a good spec to be building on. Unfortunately, that's just the case. Now, if we keep DIDs, then I expect other folks to contribute to clearly defining this. Like, I'm happy to review it, but I don't feel like it can be clearly defined for DIDs at this point. I'm starting to just feel like DIDs are extra complexity in the architecture.
So that was in our charter, was to try and figure out which direction we wanted to go post X509. So I'm fine with that, Ori, but we need to start the conversation. Whether it's DIDs or not, I don't care.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like viewing issuer key discovery with metadata works for any structured identifier that supports that key discovery protocol. So like it works with DIDs actually. It's just that like it's defined. We only need to cite the thing that tells you how to get to the public key from the string. And DIDs don't really help us do that.
I think it's a little bit more than that, isn't it, Ori? Don't we need to get to the public key and potentially the previous keys to know what other statements the identity assigned?
So yeah, that was one of the things when I read the latest draft. I was like, this is pretty weak. The whole concept of making previous issuer keys transparent is like one sentence, I think, and it basically says like when we register signed statements from issuers, we'll make the issuer's verification key transparent. But like, why? Like, what are you going to do with that? Like, we'd have to describe that more in order for that activity to be meaningful. And we should probably describe it in a concrete supply chain scenario use case where you know for sure, hey, like when this signed statement has this problem in the future, I go back to the transparency service and I discover the issuer's verification key, which I then go do something with.
But didn't we do that, saying, hey, if I wanted to find all the claims done by an auditor, I'm going to need to know their past identities for exactly
that's a sort of separate thing. I mean, that's true. You have that capability already.
How? If I'm asking the ledger or a SCITT process on the other side, how do we expect to be bound? That's the problem.
Yeah, but there's other people queued.
Yeah, and but by all means, Cedric, continue. But I want to be careful not to make this whole meeting just about this. I wrote this in the notes. This is probably a good topic for us to discuss at 118. Is our coupling to DID and not attempt to solve it here. So let's keep this capped a little bit and make sure we're we know we're discussing all the things we're discussing at 118 and not just solve this one.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's something we should discuss in depth at 118. The reason we picked DID is to avoid having to deal with PKI and discoverability issues. So and DID is not great for it, but it's not clear what's the alternative. So we need to look again at those issues and decide what we do about discovery is not a problem. The problem is to make discovery secure and unambiguous, and that's tricky still. But that's for 118, I guess. There are good write-ups on the mailing list that we can go back to for that.
Hank, you still got your hand raised if it's not.
Similar reasoning than before. I want not to be stuck with X509. If we can have something in here that will enable us to use other identity documents, I'm happy. Then I heard secure identity discovery. I think I remember ATLS being a method to understand that the resolver that gives you an identity document is doing what it is intended to do and nothing else. ATLS is a building block for this security and identity discovery and resolve, or whatever the mechanism is then named. And ATLS was not updated deliberately. There's a reason for that, because the IAB made this statement that attestation pretty much is bad. And hints were sent to certain authors to not poke the beehive today. So I assume that ATLS is a building block for trustworthy and secure resolve of and discovery of identity documents and others. I want to have this requirements again. I want to have this requirement, and my requirement is we can't be stuck with PKIX. We have to be more flexible, and it doesn't have to be a nightmare for everybody involved. Yeah.
Hank, is the ATLS comment about the ESG like web environment thing, is that the same thing?
Yeah, so the IAB issued a statement about WEI, W-E-I, I think.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
And it is not said in that statement that that is the reason. That is, first of all, weird, but I know it is. And a lot of remote attestation enthusiasts that are on the brink of stuffing it into TLS stop doing it right now. They're just on hiatus and wait what's happening, which is pretty weird for an IETF thing to happen.
Okay, definitely a meaty subject to discuss at 118. There'll be lots of other people there we could collaborate with on. I mean, I don't think SCITT was designed to solve identity, but we certainly need identity for it to be useful. So we should figure out how to lean into whatever we think is going to have the most feet going forward.
Yeah, the plan was that it would prevent us from having to solve identity, but if you revisit it, then we have to find another way to avoid it.
Yeah, or fix it. I mean, DID is not done, is my understanding. So, you know, to embrace all of Ori's comments, you know, is it too late, or can it be fixed? I mean, if we're veering off track, I would hope we would go back and try to fix it as opposed to just, you know, end it. So I will have a positive thought process for that unless there's something more viable.
Okay, what did you raise? Just one ask to Rory. Is this maybe a spice question? Or is it, should we not bring that toxic
What's
thing
the
up?
this?
No DID, but other identity discovery mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of related. Like, I think it's just look, remember we had that massive thread and it was like, how do I know that I'm talking to the right guy? And it's like, you got to get a public key. Like it's just that. Like DIDs are just a complicated, confusing, and like, you know, basically not well contributed to way to do that.
Okay.
Other ways to do that are well defined are better building blocks for SCITT. I don't think we should build on a rotten foundation. DIDs are not heading a good direction in the W3C. Charter is multiple objections to the charter, all kinds of other craziness going on. It's associated with scams and ICOs. Like, it's just a problem.
Let's list and discover alternatives at the hackathon and make a list and go from there.
Okay.
I'd like to make a suggestion on this. I think what we should try to do is take this functionality that we're talking about, put it into a box, if you will, and define what the inputs and outputs are that are required for the SCITT functionality that we need. And then we can, because this box is a problem box, and it is something that we can probably talk about forever and not finish, kind of thing. And it looks like it's we're going to need to adapt in that box to changes. So if we could draw a line around that box with inputs and outputs for the rest of it, then we could stabilize this part of it and let that be unstable. And that's the way I would do it if I was running a project doing this, you know, it was software, just a big chunk of software. I'd say, let's put that in a box and adapt it as we need. And I think that would help stabilize what we're doing here so we don't get sucked into the black box. Thanks.
Actually, I think there's a second part of that, Ray, which is to get other people to engage in, if they think DID is recoverable to engage on those forms other than SCITT.
Yeah, that absolutely, that, because I think it's a hard enough box that it should be maybe a project unto it. We have projects going on, and the trouble is, if we just say, okay, what Ori kind of said there was, all right, it'll be handled in other specs. That's a little bit not quite good enough, because we need to actually define exactly what we need to have, and then how. If we use X509, how do you get to it? If you use DID, how do you get to it, and so forth? I'm sorry, but we're going to have it defined. We can't. And what was wrong with DID was they didn't define enough, at least from my understanding of it. It wasn't pinned down hard enough to how you do things, and then it was an utter mess of everybody saying it's not pinned down enough, and then about 10, 20, 30 different variations on the theme. And since we have all that mess, putting that in a box and like for the purposes of SCITT, saying, here's what we need. Do we need to look up the thing? Do we need to be able to adapt to when keys go out of commission and so forth? And then at least have that list of requirements there. And that, like you're saying, Roy, certainly that can help whatever other group there is saying, okay, look, these are the requirements for SCITT. We got to do this stuff. All right.
Ray, are you at 118?
I'm going to try to attend the remotely. No, I'm not going to Prague. So,
okay.
But it looks like my really big crunch time is happening after Tuesday. And so I can probably be there, and I'm going to be, I'm actually working on this little bit higher level thing I just mentioned before, but it's not in a state where it's like ready to turn over. But anyway, yes, I will be
remotely. Okay.
In meetings. I can't, I don't know what time it's going to be here when you have your when everyone's awake there. They're probably early in the morning or something.
Yeah, the hackathons are really hard to collaborate upon, just because there's so much conversation around the table and so forth. But
so if it's in the evening, I guess in Prague time, like if we could schedule a meeting at the hackathon, like at night, that for sure, like pin down a time when it'll be sometime here that we can have the meeting after everybody's put stuff on the board and everything else, and try to pin down. But yeah, I would like to. I think I can contribute to that if I'm awake. Thanks.
So what I'm kind of hearing is at IETF, we really do have a question of what are we doing for binding identity? And I can't think of a better place to have that conversation and kind of like, hey, who's got an idea of wants to contribute here, including the folks working on DID that could say, hey, we're not dead yet. But what do we need to do to solve this? If that's really a case, and if Ori's one of the legs of the body and he's saying I'm out, then the body's dead. I don't know. I'm kind of just purposely painting an extensive picture here, but I think we really do need to fill this hole. I don't think we can fill it before. I want to make sure we're at 43. We still need to figure out what exactly is our presentation. What are the sections? Who are the owners? I don't know why I'm out of focus here. And get that nailed. So.
Well, just as a word of caution, I think solving identity is way beyond our charter. So, and it's very big. So we need to figure out who can help us there. But solving it on our own, I think, is too dangerous.
But mentioning
that, very large issue, right?
Yeah, but Cedric, mentioning that the idea seems to be going off in an odd direction. That if it's a potential replacement, it looks like it's becoming less so. So the discussion of what else to float out there is valid. I agree. We don't define it and all the rest of it, but mentioning it seems to be going in a direction that makes it unusable for us is perfectly fine. I raised my hand for a slightly different reason, which is the last IETF. We had a few cases in the presentation where people went up to the microphone and tried to go off in weird directions. The Gordian message one was a prime example. So we kind of need to have statements or interruptions to say, hey, that's out of scope or out of topic, and something to look for. It can't be just solely on Hank and Ori to interrupt.
Sounds like I missed some fun. I thought I watched it and didn't remember that, but I might have missed that.
Actually, you probably, if you go back and watch Bob Muskovitz get up and talk about doing it for the last 25 years, that was the result of somebody trying to derail the conversation, saying, hey, we have to have this, that, and the other thing. And it was out of scope for what the ledger was trying to do. And
So Bob brought it back on track.
Well, no, Bob goes, hey, this is a different problem. The Gordian message guys were trying to get their technology in there. And that was an issue in the last IETF.
Okay, so 15 minutes. Yogesh, is it related to landing an agenda for the meeting?
Sort of, yes.
Spin it towards that, or
Yeah.
because we got to land this.
I think we ought to, at the IETF 118 hackathon, we ought to discuss about what are we going to do as an identity. So I don't know what Ori is not here, but I would love to have some discussion.
I'm here.
No,
And
but Ori, you're not there. As you mentioned at the hackathon, you won't be participating in the SCITT activities, right?
I'll be at the hackathon. I was planning on doing HPKE like work there, but I'll be present at the hackathon. I'm just giving fair warning, like maybe less time on SCITT this time.
You won't be
I
sitting
think-
at the table in the active conversations all the time.
Yeah, I think maybe we should center around for focus on leaving the core identity definition outside the spec and in an implementation, as possibly these are the possible routes to identity. And we just in the core architecture, we don't prescribe a specific identity protocol. Could be the way forward rather than
And
just
that
going
was
with
my ask around the CWT issue, or can that be generically pointed to various solutions?
Yes,
I think
that's how it works.
I think Ray's comment of having it, here's what we need to achieve, looking for people with their tech is maybe a better way to do this. Like I've written up the auditor statement problem multiple times. We just probably have to put it in together and say, hey, this is the issue we're trying to solve.
I didn't capture. Sorry, Roy, if you want to type what you just said, I didn't process it. Apologies.
I'm saying we've written up the auditor's scenario multiple times. It's the one that kind of puts additional stress on this key identity problem. Like we want historical information and so forth. And we may be enough to put it in a box, like Ray said, saying, here's our problem statement. We're looking for solutions that's non-X509 based or PKI based.
Fair enough.
And that may be the way to pull other people in.
What I also like is, we there's some areas that we as the SCITT group need to specifically identify what we do. And there's places to lean into other specs, including evolving and different specs that solve the same problem. So when things are just a string, it does allow different issuers to use different solutions. What's also nice, so it doesn't become a big free-for-all, is we in SCITT specifically calls out a registration policy, and it'd be interesting to go back and test the spec if it really says this, but the idea is a particular transparency service implementation can implement rules that says it requires specific identity types. So we have the flexibility in the architecture, and then instances have the flexibility to enforce what they accept, which can evolve over time, which is why I'd like to get deeper into the registration policies, because the assumption is registration policies evolve over time on a particular SCITT instance. How do you capture what policy, a transparent statement, was tested against in January versus a new statement that was registered in March? There's no guarantee those are registered against the same registration policy. How does that show up in the receipt? Yogesh, was that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% with you. I think we should exactly adopt this direction. as to not boil the ocean and kind of lean towards a direction where the individual implementers of SCITT have the flexibility of enforcing a particular identity protocol to be built on top of the SCITT architecture, and then can have rigid policies baked into the registration policy if required be. And that is, I think, the way forward, because then we don't kind of rat hole in the identity discussion.
And different transparency services can evolve, as they feel fit. And if one doesn't evolve, just like anything else, if it doesn't evolve, it dies. And another transparency service can start taking its place. And I'm not trying to say, one software company versus another, but other groups that want to provide. Anyway, I'm going to get off in too much a distance. Back to agenda. How is this? Because there's obviously the agenda, what we're going to present on Monday. There's a hackathon. So let me put a hackathon topic in here as well. So I'll leave that as a bucket, and we can do that. So obviously identity direction. Yes, by the way. Does this look like? I'm actually reading myself to make sense. So if I go back to what is the presentation, and I'm going to keep on harping on this until the template is done for the flow and we have speakers slotted for each slot, because until a speaker is appointed a speaking slot, there's no compelling event to get this thing done. So I want to make sure that whoever's speaking knows what slot they own, and they are going to personally make sure that we're on track. So summary, terminology, which includes the feed conversation. The next one is coupling to DID, continue or shift. I think that's a great topic. We'll take whatever we discuss at the hackathon and we'll surface it there. I don't know how far we'll get in the registration policy, but I think that is the logical next step, because it's about getting information in, because if you don't have it in, you can't get it out for auditing. And of course, we're issuing receipts. There's a little cleanup that we need to do there. And then we can talk about where we are with auditing capabilities. And I think this will be a good topic to have. If we can do PRs between now and 118, that's great. We won't submit it to what people would read, but it can certainly be on the site and we can have this conversation there. So Roy, if we want to start focusing some information there, that'd be great. But as far as a presentation section, what is this? How does this look to folks, and who would want? First of all, do people think this is the right agenda?
I would love to see something talking about lightweight auditing using consistency proofs at some point.
Do this here.
Lighter weight. I shouldn't say lightweight. Lighter weight.
All right, let me put this down here in the bottom here.
Steve, one suggestion from my side: we should look for the updates gone from the last IETF, and if we even figure it out, one or two topics which we have kind of concluded with consensus, we should show that as a progress in the very first 5 or 10 minutes of our presentation.
I would caution against that, because you're going to get immediately into the feed morass.
No. Feed is an open topic. No. I'm talking about any other topics which we happily concluded and baked into the architecture document or the receipt document. Usually that's how typically IETF works. We had to show progress. We had a consensus, and these are the open items which are under discussion, and it's going to be progressing. So it's once done, work to be done in the sequence. So I'm not sure whether we have achieved that in the last 3 months. Consolidating.
So what you're saying is you want to add something more in the summary section, which is the decisions made since 118. So
yes, or some kind of closures made in last 3 months. Yes, some activities that were closed last 3 months, if at all, if there are any. Otherwise, just drop it here.
Okay. And Roy, lighter weight. Sorry,
The lighter weight auditing using consistency proofs.
Consistency proofs, that's what it was.
You know, Ori did a fantastic job of saying, hey, inclusion proofs and consistency proofs, they're slightly different from each other. There's value for both. And I think we should capitalize on it. Because it's the only thing for heterogeneous implementations of a ledger that we could easily do, or we can do, right? There's no way we're going to normalize the ledger data and say, hey, you can audit them all the same way.
Fair enough. Hank, you're being awfully quiet.
He's
you
still
fall asleep?
dealing with time lag.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
Adoption calls also. Yeah, so I listen in.
I'm just
think
listening, Hank, like his booting up.
So no. I think the this is too much. Can't do all of this.
How much time do we have?
Hackathon. 2 days, like
No,
starting
sorry,
8
at the meeting.
Yeah, the hackathon. I mean, oh, you mean, oh gosh, I don't know. I guess it's a 2-hour meeting, 90 minutes. Oh, I've imported it into my schedule already because I had to do interview skits, and this is a bad meeting. I have no free time. So skit is happening in a 2-hour slot on Monday. So yeah, so we have 2 hours in the meeting. We have 2 days in prep. Still, this is too much. We have to prioritize, I guess. But we can do the prioritization at the weekend at the end. Yeah.
Can we start getting some speakers signed up?
Hmm?
So do we agree
Topics.
these are the 3 major sections? Is there anybody from a 2-hour slot of the meeting? Are these the sections we want to cover? We should probably have a where do we put the hackathon results? So it was in the beginning.
I think it comes in towards the end before the Q&A, right? If I remember correctly.
It does, but since identity is such a focus, and would this be here?
So is it meant to cover the CWT challenge? CWT is a bigger
what
cell
challenge?
than the feed, right? In the summary, the feed is covering the CWT.
CWT. Okay, sorry, I didn't get the pronunciation. I apologize.
So I think the feed is a small part of it, but CWT is probably something we need to explain in the summary.
Fair.
Yeah.
It was assumed as part of that, but yes.
Okay, yes. We started by the feed.
I will specifically call it out.
It went much further. Yes. Good.
So Hank or Ori, do you want to take part of that since that's an area you guys been focused on? I'm looking for presenters.
Yeah, I can do any of this. I can start with a summary, I guess. And
you could. I'm thinking you or Ori should probably dig into the work that you've been doing on CWT and represent it here is my thought.
I try to see the item that includes that. Yeah. So that is summary. Huh?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And this is one slide. It says we took these terms and now they're represented like this. Next slide.
Do people have time to go over? Because we technically have 1 minute left.
We need to go, sorry, but there is still next week, right?
Yeah, same here.
Next week, we're screwed up on daylight savings time shifts, right? Europe shifts and America doesn't, if I remember right.
I thought America was first. Oh, no, we delayed it, didn't we?
I can go.
Either way, next week, I think we're off by an hour.
Earlier? Later?
That's a good question. All right. Can people stay now? That's the first question for a little bit.
I can.
Who can? Roy, Hank?
Same here.
You can stay?
I cannot.
Okay,
Cedric.
so Cedric's dropping. So Cedric will obviously keep on to the notes. You're at 118, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Hank is probably, will just keep on waking, and Monty will go knock on his door and wake him. Ori, do you have a couple of minutes?
Yes, I said I can stay.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that. All right, so let's continue. Those have to drop. Thank you, and watch for the notes, and the recording will be available. All right, so agree that this feed conversation is in the summary, so it's one slide. I'm going to come back to the summary on who presents that, because let's drill into the other pieces. Do we think this section on the gazintas and the gazoutas kind of the service that the capabilities we're building is the right focus for the meeting? Because that's, if you look at this is what goes in and this is how it comes out. Thoughts? Agree, disagree?
I would add a section after IETF summary, after 117 summary, called API updates. I would add a section called receipts. I would
I would also cover part of that we didn't make progress on this identity registration policy. We thought we had a solution. And
cover that under API updates.
Thanks, Ori.
Yeah.
Identity, I'm going to move it up in a second. Identity registration, is that what we said?
Yeah, part of it.
Yeah, we thought we had a solution, but
yeah.
And the thought is DID?
No, the thought was
I'll cover it. Like,
okay.
I'll cover. But basically, API updates are going to cover the API interfaces, changes, the identity pieces that we got into the API. The receipts piece will cover some part of the CWT claims stuff that we didn't cover in the introduction. The decoupling DID thing will be moved up to part of the API discussion.
Okay.
And
I feel like that's
on report is usually its own thing, so I would just give it its own space.
I'll put it at the bottom for now.
And audit capabilities, getting information out of SCITT. That's part of the API interface. So is the querying thing. Move those both under the API.
Yeah, I see what you're doing. You're kind of converting it around. You implement these through the API as opposed to what I was more thinking of. Here's, and I'm just debating for the sake of figuring out which direction we want to flow it. One was, here's the core capabilities, here's the APIs to do it. What you're suggesting is, here's the APIs to achieve these outcomes.
Yeah, I think we should be reporting on what we've done at this point, not talking about core capabilities. So we should be moving those sections under audit capabilities into the API, or commenting on why the API does not and will not ever support them.
It does feel weird that we were talking about APIs, yet we didn't submit Scrappy.
That's fine. Like, it's, you know, it's, we have, first of all, we pulled out that content from the architecture. We're still refining it. It can move faster, you know, in its current format. You know, we can decide not to discuss APIs, and then it's just cut the entire API piece from the conversation. But then let's not talk about like querying or, you know, discovery or these other issues.
So tangent, I'm pulling on a thread here. What is this? I mean, we still have all of these transparency service APIs. How does this, is this still the anchor to which Scrappy attaches?
Yes.
Okay, so we technically still have APIs in the document. We just have more details captured in Scrappy.
Yes.
Okay. So
be aware, there is a requirement for an API from something like a storage subsystem where it has to talk to the ledger for its trust relationship. So that, don't think of necessarily the API only from the end user to the ledger. In the software case, a ledger is potentially invisible.
Yeah,
But-
we don't think of it that way, but we do think of the API as a single API that's poorly defined right now.
Correct, and which is why I said, when you're thinking about it, just be cognizant. I do believe there is a channel between the storage subsystem or whatever to ledger to ask questions like this.
Actually, it'd be great to give 2 bullet points underneath API to cover the API for consumers and API for software producers and artifact repositories.
Yes,
API for and
consumers.
API or it's verifies as a consumer and issuer.
API for artifact repository and API for software consumer is the text I would prefer, since I'm going to have to develop the text for this section.
Sorry, API for, say that again, or say it or type it, or if you don't mind.
Just give me the HackMD link again. I don't
Yeah, sure.
think I have it. Thanks. I'll update the section. You can move on to
Okay.
other.
So, all right. So your position is these go into, we're going to basically use the API update section to cover auditing.
Be careful there.
Go ahead.
Right, because I think the discussion of consistency proof gets you into format for COSI, right? So is it an API or is it just a data format that we're talking about? You're correct in some ways. There is a huge intersection, but be careful. The receipt stuff, when you talk about CWT claims, you're now going to get into jail with what's the difference between all the other uses of claims that we ran into, RATS claims and blah, blah, blah. And I still struggle with why does it matter, right? Unless the ledger or part of our system takes advantage of CWT claims, I don't even think we should even mention them, which is why I was so vehement in my comments of saying, hey, just get rid of feeds. Get rid of CWT claims, acknowledge that they can use those on top of the documents, but be careful if you were going to bring CWT claims in, you're going to have to then spend the time saying, hey, this is not a SALSA claim, this is not a RATS claim, blah, blah, blah. How do these all intersect? You're now going to get into a potential swamp.
So this is Hank. If you really expect that only and just only application layers, aka indexing systems with each their own semantics, will be the thing that you discover things with, you do not need all of this in the non-opaque COSI envelope.
Correct.
But I think a generic interrelationship of statements over time that are typical life cycle relationships, when you talk about the same document that evolves or gets addendum and yada, 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 there is usefulness in that. But there's also, of course, a lot of work to do this. We don't have to do this today. You can add it on later. But if we add it on later, it is helpful to have the claims bucket already. But they will, of course, why do you have that already now? So I don't know, whatever floats your boat. I think that is application specific. I think that is why we need feedback from early implementers to understand that.
Yep.
Yeah, Roy, I'm trying to capture your needs in the auditing section. Just to be clear, like there's a disconnect between the thought to get rid of feeds and subject and what you're asking for. So I don't think that those are separable things. That I believe the way you do auditing is through a collection of statements, and I want to get to the auditing section to show how that provides that solution. So that's
well hang on a second. So the whole point of the title SCITT is transparency, right? So the question is, if the data from the ledger is not transparent, then we failed. The problem with it is we're saying, hey, the format is potentially different depending on the implementation. So there is no consistent way.
Wait. Jump back up and say that again, because that I didn't follow that.
If you use an archivist or CCF ledger, or using your own implementation of a SCITT, because that's why we wrote it as a spec, we're not stipulating the append-only log must be a specific format. How you navigate it is potentially an implementation detail of that system.
That's correct.
Hold on. Okay, you just said that's correct, so I'm missing something. The implementation detail is up to like which format the append-only log is up to it, and the receipt will articulate which it was. The same APIs should exist across all transparency services, regardless of what they implement.
I'm not arguing that. What I'm arguing is one of the statements we had was you can take our logs and navigate them yourself to validate that what we said was correct is correct. And that is not achieved with a heterogeneous implementation, which is why I floated the boat and hung on top of what Ori was saying is there is a value for consistency proof there that handles a lot of the auditing. So ask the service to validate the ledger content and prove that it actually had the content it said it did for a receipt is a valid scenario that could be implemented across multiple implementations.
Okay, Ori, I know you got your hand raised for this. We're going deep. I want to get back up to what is the agenda we're covering and land that. Once we have the agenda we're covering and we know who the owners of the speakers are, I'm happy to go back and drill in. But
Okay.
I want to make sure
some of what I said was wrong, and you can parts.
To be continued. We will. I have no doubt we will get back to the details on that. Bubbling back up. Right now we have a summary, and then we hand off to Ori. I think we want to split this up a little bit more. So let's. Hank, I thought Yogesh was staying. I misunderstood what he was saying as far as whether he was staying or not. Hank, do you have an area that obviously you want to speak. I know you want to speak on this. You're great at this. Is there a particular area you want to drill in, and how do we split this up a little bit? We have 2 hours, and obviously there's sections at the end for discussions and so forth, but that's still a good chunk of time. How do we want to split this up?
So I'd hope to talk about where we're coming from, what's our actual contribution again, to give a small recap. So why is this so cool? And then highlight what cool things we have done to do this as a summary item. And then delve into a summary of the next questions we will talk about in the next 1 hour and something with open discussion. I prefer to do that. So, and that is, of course, something we can only finalize at the hackathon, but I'm pretty sure that you have to captivate the room in order for them not to glaze over and then do their, I don't know, ID work in room.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's fair. I like the idea of kicking it off with, why are you here? Why are you here other than a room to do your other work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we got, why is it cool?
You could
got it entrenched.
You could give the registration policy stuff its own section before the API, and you could have Yogesh present on that section. The reason I say that is I think he's been one of the consistent voices around registration policy, and it needs pressure to evolve, I think.
Yep.
Fair enough. And John, as chair, he can't jump up in there and speak on this, or I'm assuming he can.
He can take his chair hat off.
Yeah. How does tell me about that? Is that you guys?
I'm taking my chair hat off, and then he presents.
Yeah, it's just as easy as that, Steve.
It's a
but we also
mechanism.
don't have Hannes. Is Hannes active for this event, and then it's after this one, or is this the one where he's not actually going to be a chair?
Typically, you can't just step off 2 weeks before a meeting. How would you get a new chair? So my assumption is, actually I haven't talked to him about it, but I think it's very unlikely he will not be chairing 118, because that is I don't know. Yeah, that's my assumption.
But that raises the question, do you want to make any chair or process call outs during this meeting, or do you want to handle that offline?
That is Roman's call. We don't do that.
I know that Hannes has been talking to Roman about that. So,
you're right.
and this isn't new. This was, he said, just to be clear, because we got the recording here in a whole bit, Hannes had set expectations when he took the chair position a year ago that it was going to be a 1-year thing. So just for completeness here,
Okay.
my understanding is Hannes is
Ball in
working
Roman's
with
court,
Roman
there's
on
no
that.
action for us.
All right. So the point is that it's realistic that Hannes will be at chair on this event. So if John wants to take his hat off and speak, I'll follow up with John and figure out what area. So Hank, go back to what you were, whoever said registration policy, help me with the agenda bashing. So I like this. This is great. Do we want to call about auditing here and then get into the API updates? Like, do we want to talk? We have that flow that Cedric had done, Cedric or Antoine, I can't remember who, where he talked about the slide of the architecture slide, kind of gives, why is it so cool? Great. Here's what we've been doing since the last meeting. Here's the architecture as a high level overview, and let's drill into 2 updates.
Yeah, I mean, this is designing the section that Yogesh and John need to come up with. So I wouldn't want to tell them how to do their job, but I guess at this point, I would expect the registration policy design, key design principles to be reviewed, and then the code points in the envelope to be called out, and that to be basically it.
Which is why I gave you the 3 things there, Steve. Just let's do the problem statement. What did we try? And what are we looking at as alternatives?
Oh, you're going back specific to the identity part.
No, registration policy. So I put the 3 bullets.
No, but what is it that you're suggesting we tried something and didn't succeed? That's what I'm missing.
We tried feeds as a solution to that problem.
Yeah, we're still not on the same page on that one. So I think feeds is an answer.
Dude, that's exactly how we got into this thing, right? We should acknowledge how we got down a road and why we're not happy with it. Right? We still haven't solved the problem.
I don't agree that we haven't. Okay, until we discuss auditing, it is not clear that I don't believe you're getting the answer that you want. So that's why I want to get into auditing, because I think it'll highlight why the feed subject answer solves that problem. So I'd like to have registration and auditing as being part of what goes in and what comes out, because I believe the auditing will show how the registration is so important.
The auditing, we're usually talking about, show me what's on the ledger and its data. Right? We haven't even talked about how do you get at the configuration of the ledger itself as part of that conversation. Like, how is that transmitted?
I believe we've talked about it in
it's not written down.
Anything. Well, I agree. But it's hard to write something down and point to other pieces on how it's done if those other pieces aren't stable. That's why I believe things like the feed and subject is important, because one of the feeds is, here's the registration policies that have evolved over time. Here's the configuration for this service that have evolved over time. So you can look at a sequence of statements that have been made around what changes were made.
CWT Claims has nothing to do with that. You just ditched feeds in with CWT Claims and tell me how the hell the 2 of them are related. We tried something. This is not the solution for that.
You keep on saying it's not the solution, and I don't agree with that.
CWT Claims are things that the signer puts in their signature. And if you're arguing that causes the ledger to bifurcate feeds, that means there's a direct relationship between what a random person is submitting and work you're making the ledger do. And tell me how that relates to getting the configuration policy from the ledger. What CWT feed or claim would I go looking at to get the ledger's configuration? That's why these things are so muddled, is it didn't solve that problem.
So let me try. Ori, I'm going to tee you up and then I'll let you run with it. I believe my understanding is I look at a CWT claim and it has an issuer and a subject For this purpose, that's all I care about right now. I can see, based on the subject, here's a collection of statements that have used the same subject. Those are the series of statements around that artifact. That artifact is defined by the value in the subject. Hold on.
Who controls
And
that, Steve?
I'm trying to, let me finish. So there are a collection of statements that were registered on the transparency service that have the same subject. By using the issuer, I could see who are the different parties that have made statements around that subject. So now I can, as an auditor, I can see
that. Well, just hang on a second. That is valid for the layer above where you want, which is why Hank said this. When it comes down to what do you expect the ledger to do with this is where I struggle, because the issuer tagging something and causing the ledger to do megacycles worth of work is not something you want to design in your API.
Right. That's what I was going to say before. Like, it is possible to build an API that is agnostic to the append-only log structure. The COSI working group adopted draft that we rely on for receipts implements such a sort of generic interface. Our API exposes an interface on top of that generic interface. So in short, you send signed statements in, you get receipts out, you talk to the API to get the receipts out or to ask questions about receipts. You can ask any questions regarding any of the points in the CDDL here. So if you look just at the CDDL for a second, these are the kinds of places where you could ask questions in the API. But
all right.
You can't.
We did it again. We drilled back in. All I wanted to do was finish the agenda. And part of the agenda was
Steve,
we're talking about auditing.
Exactly. No, we didn't. We were saying what is Yogesh, and that's why I put the comments in here. You're back to auditing. This is not a necessary auditing as we've defined it question. This is more of a question of there was this problem. We didn't have a solution. How do we detect the policy has changed rapidly? I shouldn't require an audit on a every minute basis to figure out whether somebody dicked with the policy or not. That's the problem. It is not necessarily an audit only problem. If you want to go back to the auditing basically is a combination of, at some level, give me the raw data and I'll go mine through it to prove that your system is correct. Or as I put down in the API there, is there a place for consistency proofs? And that should be the open discussion that is happening in the meeting.
Do we have this captured in our use cases and scenarios? Because what I'm hearing is I've been using auditing as a generic bucket. I think auditing, because it's just so many buckets we have, and I'm just conceptually. And auditing, you may want to query every statement on the transparency service, or I'm really focused on the statements made about my thing, because a transparency service is going to represent many different artifacts, not all of them in the world, but all the ones that Microsoft ships, all the ones that Adobe ships, all the ones that somebody else, ARM ships. And within that, you have multiple artifacts that you're speaking of, whether it be different product lines or services. And you need to be able to delineate between all of them.
Once again, that's under the control of the person who signs it. And if it causes the ledger to do massive amounts of work, we failed.
Okay, we're starting to. We've got.
I'm just calling out. You've made this.
I hear you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I want to get the agenda landed, because if we don't have an agenda, then we're just showing up and you're not even showing up at IETF.
Ori's done a good job. He went and rejiggered where he wants to talk about issuing receipts, right? And it's fine. What he's got there is fine. I would just, hey, if you want to have a bucket on auditing, then talk about auditing both the data and the policy. How is it achieved? Is there a requirement for consistency of formats? And I would argue no, and it's a non-goal to make the blockchain or a Merkle tree or everybody's implementation to be the same.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do we have the framing of a 2-hour slot?
Yes, at least.
All right. Hank, are you the kickoff?
Mm-hmm.
Are you our cheerleader to get things going?
Why not?
Can we
I mean,
remove?
we are super early within a session layout. Seriously, very early. So
It's
I'm okay.
Monday, the first day of the week. You guys, we're all going to be busy on the weekend before doing hackathons. We don't want to spend a hackathon doing slides. I want to get the slides done before we get there. We will tweak them, I am sure. But in previous IETFs, we
It's
had
a
like
plan.
Wednesdays and Thursday meetings. So
Can we remove finish submitting statements to SCITT? I don't know what that is. Underneath API.
oh, that was that's
Is there any other major block that needs to be discussed?
Personally, I was wondering whether the hackathon output needs to be moved up a lot.
it
further
depends on
up.
what we do with the hackathon outputs. Likely, if hackathon output impacts one of the things above, then absolutely. I
would recommend covering hackathon briefly at the beginning. And I really do mean briefly. I think we spend far too much time talking about hackathon in our regular IETF sessions.
Because there is a hackathon presentation.
Yeah.
We don't have to do it twice.
Wait, what? What do you mean there's a hackathon presentation?
At the end
Yeah,
of
but-
the hackathon, you're supposed to present. what you-
Oh,
Yeah, but not
yeah.
everybody
that's
is doing that. We were recapturing that typically in the session. So
Like a recap, just don't spend half the session talking about your hackathon.
Yeah, let's figure out, this is one, just as much as I said, I want to get things landed before we get there. That weekend, as whatever, I am sure what we think we're going to talk about now is not going to be what we wind up talking about that weekend. So we will adjust. I will block out a good chunk of Sunday afternoon to finalize what we're actually doing on Monday. And whatever we wound up discussing at the hackathon, we'll fit it into here. So point taken.
What's this presenter's bullet point?
That was just my slot for making sure we assign the presenters. That's not the actual presenters. That's these parens now. Who else do we have as speakers? Oh, actually, that's why I started having presenters. Oops. We
You,
have Hank, Ori,
Steve.
Cedric, me.
and I don't know whether we're gonna twist.
Yogesh,
Christine.
sorry. I would love to have Christina speak. She hasn't been able to, and
Yeah, I have a meeting with her this week.
okay.
And
And if she
specifically,
can help with some of the identity stuff, because I'd
Right.
love to watch Ori and Christina speak.
Yeah, Christina and I want to kill DIDs together. So when you talk to her, tell her I floated that idea and that together Galaxy. And
I was actually hoping you would be more of a bit of battle bots between each other, because you guys have a great dynamic. So Hank, before I could put Christina's name on here, I'll let you discuss with her. All right, let's wrap up because we are a half an hour over. I will be bashing on this for this week a little bit more. I'll get some slideware, slots out for folks to paste in. Ori, go ahead.
actually, Ori, as part of the identity thing, you're gonna have to lay out where you think like CBP or verifiable identities and other governments are looking at, and whether it aligns or whether they're going down a completely different rabbit hole.
yeah, I mean, if we can't get rid of DIDs, then we'll have to discuss what terrible and decisions governments are making regarding them.
Correct.
Yeah. The main thing I wanted to say is, like, if you can share a link to the slides, that I can do them ahead of time, like as in like today or tomorrow, like please share the link to the slide draft for 118 as soon as possible, and I'll get my slides done ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm going to create the placeholders, and by all means, you guys own the sections.
The other thing to call out is that a lot of focus has been done on the software use case, and it gets us into jail by saying NIST is going to do this and that. We kind of need a global solution. So we just have to call out, we're trying to solve a world problem, not a US NIST problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for the extra time. Thank you for bearing with me, trying to herd everybody into a focus on landing the agenda. I have no doubt we'll drill into these details. Thanks, folks.
Good job.
Tim.
Bye-bye.